Good morning. Tomorrow we have our first lunch bunch with a group of girls, so that'll be exciting. Besides that, not a lot of news, except for that instead of doing emails, we're going to finish this week, but instead of doing emails for the rest of the school year, we are going to be switching to something called Google Classroom. So most of you are already on it, so that's great. It kind of seems like it'll actually be easier, so I'm glad to see that. So starting next Monday, I'm going to put everything there, including read-alouds and everything, and I think you can kind of comment on things and maybe comment on each other's things, which would be kind of cool. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. In Matilda, Miss Honey, the wonderful, beautiful, amazing Miss Honey, she's one of my favorite characters. She has gone to the headmistress, Miss Trunchbull, the horrible, awful, antagonist, yucky, horrible lady. And basically, she's telling her what a genius Matilda is. Unfortunately, the Trunchbull doesn't care, and that's where we're at right now. So she's telling her right now, and Miss Trunchbull is like, no, you're not right. So I'm going to finish this chapter and start the next one. And I'm going to do it less than last time because I got to get it down. It's too long. All right. But Miss Honey was determined to have her say. And she now began to describe some of the most amazing things that Matilda had done with arithmetic, or math. So she learned a few times tables by heart, had she? Miss Trunchbull barked. My dear woman, that doesn't make her a genius. It makes her a parrot. But headmistress, she can even read. So can I, Miss Trunchbull snapped back. It is my opinion, Miss Honey said, that Matilda should be taken out of my room and placed immediately in the top with the 11-year-olds. So she's in kindergarten, so she's 5, and they want her to be in 6th grade. Ha! Snorted Mrs. Trunchbull. So you want to get rid of her, do you? So you can't handle her? So now you want me to unload her onto the wretched Miss Folsom? In the top form, she will cause even more chaos? No, 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 cried Miss Honey. That is not my reason at all. Oh, yes, it is, shouted Miss Trunchbull. I can see right through your little plot, madam. And my answer is no. Matilda stays where she's at, and that is not up to you. All you can do is to make sure that she behaves. But, headmistress, please, not another word, shouted Mrs. Trunchbull. And in any case, I have a rule in this school that all children remain in their own age groups, regardless of ability. Great Scott, I'm not having a little 5-year-old sitting with the senior girls and boys in top form. Who ever heard of such a crazy, absurd thing? Miss Honey stood there, helpless, before this great red-necked, horrible giant. There was a lot more she would like to have said, but she knew it was completely and utterly useless. She just said softly, well then, it's up to you, headmistress. You're darn right it's up to me, Miss Trunchbull bellowed. And don't forget, madam, that we're dealing here with a little viper who put a stink bomb under my desk. She did not, headmistress. Of course she did, Miss Trunchbull boomed. Let me read that one more time. Of course she did, Miss Trunchbull boomed. And I'll tell you what, I wish to heavens I was still allowed to use the birch and belt, as I did in the good old days. I'd have roasted Matilda's bottom for her so she couldn't sit down for a month. So basically she's saying she wished she could spank, even though, you can't do that. Miss Honey turned out and walked out of the study feeling depressed, by no means defeated. I'm going to do something about this child, she told herself. I don't know what it will be, but I shall find a way to help her in the end. Next chapter is called The Parents. The Bad Parents. When Miss Honey emerged from the headmistress's study, most of the children were outside on the playground for recess. Her first move was to go around to the various teachers who taught the senior classes and borrow a number of textbooks, books of algebra, geometry, French, English literature, and things like that. Then she sought out Matilda and called her to her classroom. "There is no point," she said, "in you sitting in a class doing nothing while I am teaching to the rest of the class the 2 times tables and how to spell cat, rat, and mouse. So during each lesson, I shall give you one of these textbooks to study. At the end of the lesson, you can come up to me with your questions if you have any, and I shall try to help you the best I can." How does that sound, Matilda? "Oh, thank you, Miss Honey," Matilda said gratefully. "That just sounds fine." "I am sure," Miss Honey says, "that we'll be able to get you moved into a much higher form later on. But for the moment, the headmistress wishes you stay where you're at." "Very well, Miss Honey," Matilda said. "Thank you very much for getting me these books. You're so kind." What a nice child she is, Miss Honey thought. I don't care what her father said about her. She seems very quiet and gentle to me. And not a big stuck up in spite of her brilliance. In fact, she hardly seems aware of how smart she is. So when the class reassembled, Matilda went to her desk and began to study the textbook on geometry, which Miss Honey had given her. The teacher kept half an eye on her all times and noticed that the child very soon became deeply absorbed into a book when she read it. She never glanced up once during the entire lesson. So this reminds me of Winnie, Ami, David, when you guys are reading, either when you're supposed to be or when you're not. So that's kind of funny to me. I'm making that connection. Miss Honey, meanwhile, was making another decision. She was deciding that she would go herself and have a secret talk with Matilda's mother and father as soon as possible. She simply refused to let the matter rest where it was at. The whole thing was absolutely ridiculous. She couldn't believe that the parents were totally unaware of their daughter's remarkable talents. After all, Mr. Wormwood was a successful car dealer, so she presumed that he was a fairly intelligent man herself. In any event, parents never underestimated the abilities of their own children. Quite the reverse. Sometimes it was near impossible for a teacher to convince a proud parent or mother or father, that their beloved offspring was a complete and utter nimwit, which is kind of like not very smart. Miss Honey felt confident that she would have no difficulty in convincing Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood that Matilda was something very special indeed. The trouble was going to be to stop them from getting over-enthusiastic and going to Mrs. Trunchbull. And now Miss Honey's hopes began to expand even further. She wondered whether permission might not sought from the parents for her to give her private tuition to Matilda. Wait, I'm sorry. I'm reading this entire thing over again because that didn't make any sense to me. Permission might not be sought from the parents for her to give her private tutoring to Matilda after school. The prospect of coaching a child as bright as this appealed enormously to her professional instincts as a teacher. She was excited at the thought. And suddenly, she decided that she would go and call Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood that very evening. She would go fairly late, between 9 and 10 o'clock, when Matilda was sure to be in bed. And that was precisely what she did. So I'm going to stop for a second. Predictions. Do we think they're going to be excited that she's there? Think about the characters. Mrs. and Mr. Wormwood, are they good people? No. Do they care about Matilda? No. So our prediction's probably not. Even though Miss Honey is correct that most parents would be so happy. Not her parents. So that is precisely what she did. Having got the address from the school records, Miss Honey set out to walk from her own house to Mrs. Wormwood's house shortly after 9. She found the house in a pleasant street with each smallish building that was separate from its neighbor by a bit of a garden. It was a modern brick house that could not have been cheap to buy, and the name on the gate said Cozy Nook. Cozy Nook might have been better, Miss Honey thought. Or Nosy Cook. Nosy Cook. Might have been better, Miss Honey thought. She was given to playing with words in that way. She walked up in the path and rang the bell, and while she stood waiting, she could hear the television blaring inside. The door was opened by a small, ratty-looking man with a thin, ratty mustache who was wearing a sports coat and had orange and red stripes all over. "Yes?" he said, peering out at Miss Honey. "If you're selling raffle tickets, I don't want any of it." "Oh, I am not," Miss Honey said. "And please forgive me for butting in on you like this. I am Matilda's teacher at school, and it's important I have a word with you and your wife." "Got in trouble already, has she?" Mr. Wormwood said, blocking the doorway. "Well, she's your responsibility from now on, not ours. You'll have to deal with all of her, not us. Sorry." "Oh, she's no trouble at all," Miss Honey said. "I have come with good news about her. Quite startling news, Mr. Wormwood. Do you think I might come in for a few minutes and talk to you about Matilda?" "We are right in the middle of watching one of our favorite shows," Mr. Wormwood said. "This is most inconvenient. Why don't you come back some other time?" Miss Honey began to lose patience. "Mr. Wormwood," she said sternly, "if you think some rotten television program is more important than your daughter's future, then you ought to not be a parent. Why don't you switch that darn thing off and listen to me?" That shook Mr. Wormwood. He was not used to being spoken to in this way. He peered carefully at the slim, frail woman who stood so confidently out on the porch. "Okay, very well then," he snapped. "Come on in, and let's get it over with." Miss Honey stepped briskly inside. "Mrs. Wormwood isn't going to thank you for this," the man said as he led her into the sitting room with a large platinum blonde woman was gazing at the TV. "Who is this?" the woman said, not even looking around. "Some school teacher," Mr. Wormwood said. "She says she got to talk to us about Matilda." He crossed to the TV set and turned down the sound and left the picture on the screen. "Don't do that, Harry!" Mrs. Wormwood cried out. "Willard is just about to propose to Angelica." "You can still watch it while we're talking," Mr. Wormwood said. "This is Matilda's teacher. She says she got some sort of news to get to us." "My name is Jennifer Honey," Miss Honey said. How do you do, Mrs. Wormwood?" Mrs. Wormwood glared at her and said, "What trouble is she in, then?" Nobody invited Miss Honey to sit down, so she chose a chair and sat down anyway. "This," she said, "was your daughter's first day of school." "We know that," Mrs. Wormwood said. "Is that all you came to tell us?" Miss Honey stared hard into the woman's wet gray eyes, and she allowed the silence to hang in the air until Mrs. Wormwood became uncomfortable. "Do you wish to explain why I came?" she said. "Get on with it, then," Mrs. Wormwood said. "I'm missing my TV program." "I'm sure you know," Miss Honey said, "that children in the bottom class at school are not expected to be able to read or spell or juggle with numbers when they first arrive. 5-year-olds cannot do that, but Matilda can do it all. And if I am to believe her—" "I wouldn't," Mrs. Wormwood said. She was still ratty at losing the sound on the TV. "Was she lying then?" Miss Honey said. "When she told me that nobody taught her how to multiply or to read? Did either of you teach her?" "Teach her what?" Mrs. Wormwood said. To read books." "Perhaps you did teach her. Perhaps she was lying. Perhaps that you have shelves full of books all over the house. I wouldn't know. Perhaps you are both great readers." Of course we read, Mr. Wormwood said. Don't be so daft. I read the Auto Car and the Motor from cover to cover every week for my job. This child has already read an astonishing number of books, Miss Honey said. I was simply trying to find out if she came from a family that loved good literature. We don't hold book reading in our house, Mr. Wormwood said. You can't make a living room from sitting on your fanny reading about storybooks. We don't keep them in the house. Oh, I see, Miss Honey said. Well, all I came to tell you is that Matilda has a brilliant mind, one I have never seen in all my time as a teacher. But I expect you knew that already. Of course we knew she could read, the mother said. She spends her life up in her room buried in some silly books. But does that not intrigue you, Miss Honey said? The little 5-year-old is reading long adult novels by Dickens and Hemingway? Doesn't that make you jump up and down with excitement? Not particularly, the mother said. I'm not a favor of the blue stocking girls. A girl should think about making herself look attractive so she can get a good husband later on. Looks is more important than books. Miss Hunky. The name is Honey, Miss Honey said. Now look at me, Miss Wormwood said. Then look at you. You choose books. I choose looks. Miss Honey looked at the plain, plump person with a smug, pudding face who was sitting across the room. What did you say? She asked. I said you choose books and I choose looks, Mrs. Wormwood said. And who's finished up the better? Who is better off? Me, of course. I'm sitting pretty in a nice house with a successful businessman as a husband, and you're left slaving away teaching a lot of nasty little children the ABCs and how to read. And that's where I'm stopping for this one. So, have a great day. Mwah.